quantum physics for me just represents almost different levels of consciousness. So if you have a quantum footprint, it's a level of consciousness that's been embedded into an event or into a place where they replay that particular, if you like, residual haunting, for example. So I think, to start with, just to get the ball rolling, for me, if we're talking quantum physics, it's different levels of engaging with consciousness. Throughout my career of investigating some of the most haunted buildings and places over Europe and America was the fact that I don't see ghosts and spirits engaging with me that are maybe over 150 to maybe 200 years old. And I'm a historian by trade. So if you imagine a linear line of history where you start at zero, where mankind began, if you like, Neolithic, and that linear line takes you all the way through the entire history of man, and that little tiny bit at the end is where we are now. It just seems bizarre that over those millions of years, you've got so many opportunities of the dead. I mean, I read somewhere that there's more people, the same amount of people on the planet at the moment as have ever died in the history of mankind. So there's a whole planet of people that have died. And yet I only see people coming to me during my investigations in spirit form or ghost form that have died within a recent period of human history, if you like. Most 99% of our history would have been cavemen and Neolithic. What we're experiencing now is just a very small blip. Some historians say that if you've got the entire linear history of mankind, and the 1st of January is when mankind first evolves, and you've got today's society, that would literally be 2 minutes to 12 on the 31st of December. So it was very interesting for me to start wondering what happens if ghosts and spirits are energy, and our EMF detectors would indicate that that's the case. And let's face facts, from a physical perspective, if you're looking at physics, you need energy to move things. So if your ghost in your home can flick on your light switch, if it can hide your car keys, if it can turn the faucet on and off, that requires an energy. And as we all know, if we remember back to our physics lessons, as much as it pains me, energy dissipates. It dissipates in friction, it dissipates in heat, it dissipates the friction of the air, for example. It dissipates in sound. The building can be haunted, not because it's the most haunted building on the street, but it's the building that provides the most amount of energy that allows them to haunt. If there's running water going through the building, if there's natural EMF, for example, if the right climatic conditions, if it's moist, if hot air meets, rising air meets cold air coming down, the 3rd floor is where they meet. And you could have a hot spot, if you like, or a juiced up area. So if people say the 3rd floor of that building is the most haunted, it's not the most haunted. It's the one that allows the ghosts and spirits to be the most active, because it allows them to, due to the fact the area's been juiced up for them, if you like. One of the things I was looking at the history of ghosts and sightings, because I was looking at sightings of ghosts going back a couple of thousand years, because if energy didn't dissipate, I thought if I looked at hauntings that go back, quite a few thousand years, I'll see if there's any sightings that have reoccurred recently, which would prove our point. So if you bear with me, I'll go through some of these. There was one of the first poltergeist incidents ever recorded was in 1698, and it was recorded in a pamphlet that's in the British Museum, actually, if you want to go and read it. But it was a tavern. It was in a place called Newcastle in New Hampshire. It was run by George and Alice Wharton, and the poltergeist did the things you'd expect a poltergeist to do: throw things around, slam doors. It's an energy. And that was in 1698 when that was recorded. I've done some extensive research, and I haven't found anything that's suggested that poltergeist still exists or there's anything there. And there was another case of energy from 1668, again a poltergeist. It was called the Drummer of Tedworth, and Tedworth is in the West Country of England. And it was documented by a guy called Joseph Glanville. And again, that particular noise of drums being beaten hasn't resurfaced since that time. So again, there is a sense that I've tried to look for ghosts and hauntings that have been documented going back 500 years there, and there's been nothing happening in recent times that have continued that process. If Teddington, if the drummer boy of Teddington, or that drumming noise, would still be around now, I'm sure it would have been documented by all the ghost teams that investigate in Britain. And the other thing I was interested in was in the 1960s, I was trying to think of ghosts and hauntings of Roman legionnaires or of people from a period of history a couple of thousand years ago. Now, the Romans were in Britain from 0 AD to 400 AD, and there's a place called York, which is in the north of England. It's a fabulous place if you get a chance to visit. Saxons were there, Vikings were there, and the Romans, I think, used it as their capital city at one point when they were in Britain. And a gentleman went down into the basement in the 1960s, and he was an electrician, and he was looking at the electrics down in the basement. And this is in the Civic Building. It's one of the sort of government buildings in York. And he was standing on a set of stairs, and he saw an entire Roman legion of soldiers walking through the basement. And he said they were kind of walking side by side, two abreast, but they looked very disheveled, as if they'd lost a battle. And there were some of them that were nursing wounds, and they just looked down on their luck. And they literally shuffled through the basement in front of him. And the interesting thing he mentioned, he ran out of the basement, obviously in a state of panic. And some of the staff there joked with him and said, "Oh, you've seen the Roman legionnaires then." So this was an obvious sighting that had been seen over many years. But interestingly enough, the guy said he hadn't seen anything of the ghosts below the knee. He just saw them from the knee up, walking through the basement. And they excavated the basement and they found a Roman road they hadn't previously been aware of that was about a foot below the level of the basement floor. So those residual energy of those Roman soldiers were walking on their own road, but he could only see them from the knee up because the basement had subsequently covered over by a foot the road they were walking on. But so there is an example there of a haunting that would go back 2,000 years. But I think the difference is, for me, is that's a residual haunting. It's not an intelligent haunting. And if they only appear once every couple of hundred years, you know, they're not dissipating in their energy. That might have been one of the last times they were able to do that. So he's not had any interaction with them. It was almost a replaying of an event like the quantum footprint you mentioned at the beginning. But it was just interesting for me, looking through the history of hauntings, looking for examples of ghosts that appeared, you know, that were older than maybe a couple of hundred years ago. And other than that Roman one and that kind of residual footprint, I can't think of an intelligent haunting where you've been able to discuss with the spirit almost in an interview situation that goes back more than a couple of hundred years. And I did do a lot of research on the history of ghosts. I mean, it even mentions in the Bible, of course, you know, that Saul conjures up the ghost of Samuel, for example. So people that have a religious bent that say, you know, ghosts are the devil's work and don't exist, it actually mentions them in the Bible, and the Witch of Endor, of course, summoned that up. And just to finish off on this section on history of ghosts, one of the first examples of a ghost was written about by Pliny the Younger, who was a historian from AD 61 to AD 115. And he spoke about a ghost appearing to him, rattling chains and pointing a finger when he moved into a new house. And he went to where the ghost was pointing a finger, and the ghost showed him a patch of ground outside in the garden. And he dug the ground up and he found the body that he believed of the ghost. And once he laid the body to rest and gave it a proper burial, the ghost disappeared. But, you know, there's nothing from those poltergeist events from the 16th and 15th century that's still around today from what I've researched and from what I've seen.